Hey, everybody, it's Conscious Medium Brandon Ross, and Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, whatever it is that you're celebrating. I hope it's good. I hope that it's good to you and you're good to others. Today's stream of consciousness, and what a great way to kind of wrap up this kind of hiatus that I'm going to have here for a couple of days with the Christmas star. And as much as this is a high religious time in terms of Christianity, this is also a time of high astrology. You have the winter solstice that we just had. And then we also had this whole idea of, the new moon and Christmas and all of those things coming through. We've got things that are going on in the sky, and that's continuous. But one thing that has had a very true and a very real impact on human history has been the Great Conjunct, which is also called that for one reason and one reason alone. When it's combined with Saturn and Jupiter, it becomes one star. It appears in the night sky almost out of the blue. And those that don't necessarily understand astronomy or astrology could find it to be, well, a sign. Us astrologers already know what kind of sign it is, and that's what we're talking about today in today's stream of consciousness. I really, truly hope that you guys stick around and see it. All right, everybody. Thanks again so much for sticking around here with More Than a Medium. So what is the Grand Conjunction? Well, the Grand Conjunction is something that we have had here on a very consistent basis throughout time. As a matter of fact, you don't have to go too far back into history to hear Galileo talk about it. He actually talked about the reverse engineering of where the Christmas star was. I'm going to tell you where he started it with here in a second. But you also have key events that have happened throughout human history. In other words, things happen when the Grand Conjunct happens. For instance, in 432 AD is when we celebrated the first Christmas. It was actually the first time that we honored the birth of Christ. And it was a time where Constantine actually made it the law of the land. He also combined a lot of the shamanic and otherwise pagan traditions to make sure that it was assimilated so that then Jesus was the top brass and you can put up your Christmas tree. There's a lot more to that, and that's a whole other video, but just know that it was still signified by the Grand Conjunct. Oh, by the way, if you go throughout history and you look at the cycle, that is about every 20 years. It's about 20.4 years, 20.43 to be exact. And what that actually means is that it's cyclical, it's predictable, and this has allowed us to be able to reverse engineer when the Christmas star first appeared. Well, with anything with the Bible, you're going to be talking about combining a whole bunch of different things, just like Constantine did, to come together with a new tradition. I'm about to show you evidence that the Christmas star was actually part of the dialogue even before AD was even a conversation. Now, I mentioned earlier about astronomers have been paying attention to this for a long time. I actually want to bring up, and of course I poorly labeled these. Oh, that's not it. That's not it. But this is, no, that's not it. This is it. Kepler's trilogue. This actually is him mapping out when the Grand Conjunct was happening. You'll notice that it creates a triad. So every other time it's moving around the dial. Well, look at how it just is doing this kind of like unlock of a combination. Now, this is during the time in which he was taking a look at this. This stems from 1623 to about, I think it was 1783. And he's looking at it from the standpoint of what the cycle is, and this is how he was presenting it. By the way, Kepler took a look at the stars, and he wasn't necessarily trying to assign things like, I'm trying to figure out when I should get my hair done. He's not trying to figure that out. He's actually just trying to figure out his place in the universe. Galileo used it in terms of how it could be a tracking device in terms of when you could move forward. So to somebody like Galileo, it was kind of like fun fodder, like as in like, hey, I've noticed this, whatever. But he was trying to figure out how to navigate the world. Well, Kepler, on the other hand, actually had his eye on the stars for another purpose. He wanted to understand why our planets were so close. And quite frankly, it was a little bit of paranoia. See, Kepler was really worried that if there was the right combination of stars and when they would conjunct, then the gravity would change. We were just beginning to understand gravity. Thank you, Sir Isaac. And he was actually paranoid that one of these planetoids would be coming closest to us. He actually thought that it was only a matter of time before the moon just simply crashed to Earth. Because after all, when you drop an apple, it falls to the ground. Why would the Earth not have that same effect on the moon? Well, as much as it's a step in the right direction away from the heliocentric world, or at least the global-centric world that we've had, they had since adopted the heliocentric idea, which is the sun is the center of the solar system. And that's actually what keeps things in check, not necessarily the Earth. And at one time, astrologers and astronomers actually thought that everything else revolved around the Earth. No ego there whatsoever. But I'll tell you, it's going to be great. So Kepler comes up with this design, and this is one of the earliest visualizations of what the grand conjunct was. Well, with anything where we're able to be predictable, you're able to move both forward as well as backwards. Well, this is a really key thing. We're going to actually take a look at, well, guess what? Is this the one? Yes, it is. This, everyone, whether you're religious or not, whether your belief systems allow for the story or not, this is the astrological chart of Jesus. As you take a look at this, it has been long since been speculated that his birth date was not necessarily in December. By the way, December, remember when I talked about how this story was actually about merging a couple of different things? I'm going to come back to that there in a second. But on the outset of this is at 7 BC. 7 years before we actually got to the year 0. You're welcome. And as you take a look at the reverse engineering of when Jupiter and Saturn were in conjunct, it is a really important thing. Now, there's 2 things to actually talk about here. What is a conjunction? Well, the conjunction is actually when 2 planets are at their closest, right? When they are within each other's space. They're typically a degree or so off. In terms of astrology, we actually call it a direct conjunct when it's within 6, when it's a wider conjunct until it's about 10, 11. And then beyond that, it's kind of near conjunct and that sort of thing, right? So it's kind of jargon. This is as conjunct as it gets. I want you to notice 2 very specific things. And this is the reason why September 6th in 7 BC is when the Christmas star appeared. Now, whether this was the birth of Jesus or not, we weren't there. We weren't there. You can tell me Spirit told you, but for the sake of argument with this, I just want to point out the astrology as to why this is likely the Christmas star. First of all, notice that it is appearing on the ascending in the first house. What is that ascending but Pisces? It was a call signal of us moving into the age of Pisces. And guess what? The Prince of Peace is the Piscean. That's why we have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. It's part of the reason why when you look on the back of someone's car at a stoplight, they have the fish that actually designs who he is. By the way, who did he go and recruit? But fishermen. Hey, everybody. It's called symbolism. Let's use it here in astrology. The other aspect of this, too, is the actual sequence in where the sun actually is. Notice that it's in Virgo. Who was Mary? Well, she was the Virgin. The great star appeared when the Virgin conjunct with, of all things. Are you guys seeing this? Are you seeing this? Hello, Pluto. How you doing? The great changer, the great power base. The light of the world got together in Virgo in order to say, hey, listen, let's do this. More importantly, you've also got the dynamic here where in opposition, and again, it's not in direct opposition, but you kind of get the point. You kind of get why it is that if you were going to tell the tale, you would talk about Virgo. And let's talk about Virgo for a second. Virgo, when you look at the astrological sign, when you look at the astronomy of it, and you know the folklore of it, it is the woman that is of Bethlehem, the sheath of wheat, the creator of life, not only in nourishment, but also in birth. It is about self-care. It is about self-worth. It is about self-value. Thank you so much for showing up in the 6th house. Ta-da. That is the story of Mary sitting in plain sight right in front of you. This opposition of the sun with the grand conjunct talks about the idea that this is of sacrifice. This woman gave birth to a son that would become a great thing. And we're going to talk about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunct here in a second. But there's the dialogue of this opposition of what that means. Now, let's talk a little bit for a second here about, hold on a second. Okay, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I can actually see. You've actually got the dialogue here of being able to look at, there's other things that are involved here. I mean, you've got Mercury, or rather you've got Neptune and the South Node. The South Node is in Libra, which really is a high indicator of, guess what? We're going to be comfortable with sharing. We're going to be comfortable with balance, right? Huh. And there's a dream of actually being comfortable and peaceful. By the way, the 7th into 8th house actually talks about the presence of being reliant with one another. What a fantastic way to go with this. Wow. Wowzers upon wowzers. Huh. Now, let's talk about what a grand conjunct is, right? So when Jupiter and Saturn get together, and by the way, they're very rarely right on top of each other. That is the truly rare moment. And by the way, we have to go way back to actually see it. When we talk about a grand conjunct where where literally Jupiter would sit in front of Saturn and almost create like an eclipse, if you will, that is super rare. But what's happening is that the stars kind of come right on top of each other, and then they go like, hey, buddy, how you doing? All right, see you in 20. Like, that's kind of what it's doing. But for it to be right on top of each other, that's why this conjunct is so close, but not exact. The exact happens about every 1,200 years. So take a deep breath, everybody. If you're around for that one, we're going to do great. By the way, the next one is looking at, I think, 2940. Or 38 or something like that. Either way, I'll meet you there. So one of the other things about the astrological component of those two planets getting together is planned, expansive destiny. So you have Saturn that is really the restrictor, the one that brings in the rules, the rule bringer, the one that says, yeah, you can do it, but I don't know if you want to do it like that, right? Then you have Jupiter that's like, go big or go home. Well, Jupiter kind of wins out on this in terms of the expansion, but Saturn actually creates a structure. This is where you find foundation. This is where you find great things that happen. As a matter of fact, one of the other grand conjuncts actually happened when the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth Rock, 1643. It's when the first colony was actually established here in the United States. Don't tell me that the grand conjunct doesn't start great things. My ounce of patriotism here in the holiday. But you look at this in terms of a cycle and why it is that it happens, and you look at how this might have impacted this story. And again, there are several clues that actually talk about this grand conjunct being part of the narrative, but not necessarily the birth of Christ, right? no one really knows. There are only 4 recorded historical values outside of the gospel, which, by the way, the gospels were written centuries after Jesus walked the earth, allegedly. There are only 4 times in which it is actually brought into conversation. One is in Hermetic text, and that was translated from Greek, that basically called him the Christos, and it was more of a legend. It wasn't about a carpenter. It wasn't about somebody that walked into the desert for 40 days, and it wasn't about a crucifixion. It was, however, in other texts, talked about the great man of the Christos, and he was always referred to as the Christos. By the way, what is the Christos? The Christos is the grand conjunct. It is the radar, if you will, of astrology. It is the 4 quadrants. That is the Christos. By the way, in the center of that Christos is a cross. Don't think for a second that we're not talking astrology when we talk about him hanging on a cross. Oh, he died for 3 days? Let me get to that too. And he rose again? Let me get to that one. So you've got this dynamic here in 7 AD where the grand conjunct has happened, right? This great conjunction. And by the way, I go back and forth into this for a reason, because it's been called the great and the grand. But you have this happen in a mutable sign. An immutable sign tends to be peaceful. This is in Pisces. By the way, it is in opposition to Virgo, also immutable. Mary, I need you to do this. God, I need to show an example. I need to take away pride. And by the way, you've got a lot of zigzags here. You've got a lot of trines. You've got a lot of things going on. For the sake of this conversation, just know that this is a very easy energy. Easy like a Sunday morning. Even with your opposition of the sun to this great conjunction, it's more about empowerment. It's more about sacrifice. It's more about saying, here in the 6th house, I'm going to give to you life. Jupiter and Saturn get together in the 1st house, and it's significant that it's in the 1st house because this becomes the identity of the ages. Something to think about. Now let's talk about the most recent one that we've had here. And we're going to, so sorry, it's so far away. I want to talk about the most recent one that we've had, the one that most of us have lived through. And by the way, most of us have lived through a few of these. If they're every 20 years, go ahead, do the math. You've lived through at least a couple of them, if not more. The one previous to this one was in 2001. And the time before that, it was in 1980. Actually, it was in 81, at the end of 81. But again, it's going to follow that Kepler pattern where it simply moves backwards. I want you to keep that in mind and remember that the 7 BC conjunct happened in Pisces. Now, a lot of people have talked about why it is that the Great Conjunction is so important in astrology. It's because it's an announcer. It's a triumph. It's a judgment card. It is announcing the next thing coming. It is the spark plug in which we need. It is the initiator. Well, on December 21st, 2020, there is the near conjunct. It ended up within 6 minutes of one another, which is, boy, that's awfully close. And you see Jupiter, or you see Saturn poking around Jupiter a little bit going, hey, I can't kind of get together. And I want you to notice how low it became in the sky here in the Northern Hemisphere. That doesn't necessarily matter because these conjunctions, by the way, are seen in different parts of the world at different times. Oh, by the way, the one in 7 AD was seen very clearly in the Northern Hemisphere and particularly, you guessed it, in the Middle East. But as you look at this, you'll see how it is that a conjunction actually happens. We're starting on December 6th, all the way through the 21st, how they just get closer and closer each time. By the way, where was this conjunction? It was actually in Aquarius. We talk about the next best thing, and we talk about where it is that we're going with so much of this. And I can't help but think that we're in a position where we're about to come into something very, very big. Hello, Mr. Kepler. Here we go. Here is the astrology of what that looked like. Now, remember how there was the opposition of the sun in the time of Jesus, or at least how that kind of led together. Oh, by the way, I keep peppering in facts here. One of the telltale signs of what was going on and why the conversation of 7 AD or 7 BC makes a lot of sense is because the Bible references the time of Herod often. The creeping death, all of that good stuff. The things that were leading up to it, the things that were happening in Egypt, the things that were happening in Judea. And in the time of Herod, when we were doing the, the census and all of this other stuff, was 7 BC. So again, it just kind of makes sense that things began to kind of meld. So let's talk about the narrative now as we look at 2020, which was just a few years ago. A couple of very key points. And by the way, you see how this is all top heavy. It's an all top heavy chart. We're talking about the 6th through the 12th house, each of them except for the 9th house having real like action inside of it. And look at where the conjunct is. And by the way, do you see how close that was in the visualization? Guess what? It's right on top of each other. Oh yeah, kids. This was a huge grand conjunct. Did it eclipse it? It sure did. Hope you paid attention. Hope you went outside. Hope you did a few heart taps to the moon, because here it is. Not only is it in Aquarius, but it's also in the 8th house. Well, what is the 8th house? Well, that's ruled by Scorpio. That's where we talk about sex and death and money and other people's money and resources. In the age of Aquarius. Now, if you want to backtrack into the 7 BC conversation, it was a calling card for what was coming. The Son Messiah, Jesus, was being born. What is being born now? This grand conjunct has actually happened in the age of Aquarius in the 8th house. This is about resources. This is about who we are as a people and can we get along to share. You look at the sun and the moon and they are squared. They're having a conversation about what love is. By the way, Pisces is the love and then Capricorn is the sun. Look at what's happening here. And by the way, the moon is near conjunct to none other than Chiron. By the way, there's some argument that this actually happened at the 29 mark, which still would have been within the 8th house. And let me talk about the anaretic angle of 29. This is a point of emphasis, everybody. That is what that is. That's why astrologers are like, what angle is that? 29? One of the other things to really pay attention to is the elemental part of this. Aquarius is a fixed sign. It doesn't mess around. It says this is coming. Where the grand conjunct for Jesus happened in Pisces and said, we're gonna work this out. There's a harsher energy with this conjunction, but it's all about humanity. It's all about where we're going with it. One of the other dialogues that I think we have to have a really open and honest conversation about is how we take a look at how we work with everyone else. Do we know who we are? Do we procreate for procreation's sake? Do we actually have a purpose for where we're going? By the way, the universe actually did us yet another solid and said, oh, by the way, we're going to throw Pluto right here in the middle of this. So in addition to this grand conjunct is a wide conjunct of Pluto. Your power base is built. Think about how powerful this is. And I keep using the word power over and again. You've got Saturn, the structure. You've got Jupiter, the expansion. You have Pluto, the power base. In the 8th house, its natural setting. Throw in a little Capricorn, and we could either be undone or recreated. You don't think that the world markets are falling apart on purpose? You don't think that our political structures have been taking a beating on purpose? Then you start to add in the conversations about the Pluto returns for the United States. Now this stuff gets really interesting, doesn't it? This is a conversation about how astrology has actually shown its patternistic behavior and given us opportunities to grow in leaps and bounds. Now, whether you believe in the Son Messiah, Jesus, is your business. But to argue that something didn't change the world significantly from that date moving forward, you're not paying attention. That's why the Grand Conjunction actually is a calling card, the hallmark of what's coming next. We're barreling towards the age of Aquarius. There is the argument that we're already in it if you start counting things like shadow time. Because in that cycle, in that 2140-year cycle, we're arguably right almost at the 2100 days, at the 2100 years. This is going to signify when that started to happen. And for me, as an astrologer, I'm going to say that was kind of a kickoff point. I'm going to say that that was pretty strong because in just another year and a half, we're going to have Pluto go into Aquarius. Just like we had all of these things happen in Pisces to not only give it the sign of what was coming, but also the dialogue for us to be open, clear, and progress. We talk about moon travel now. We talk about Mars travel. We're talking about getting off planet. Are we doing it because of ego or because of humanity? We still have bombs and we still shoot each other. But when we look at the hope and the humanity in this, it really is up to us. The idea that it's in the 8th house means that we have to take personal responsibility for who we are. That's the hallmark of a Scorpio. That is the hallmark of saying, I'm sitting here judging you because you're not doing what you should do, but I'm going to do what I can do. That's a thing. There's dialogue here for us to learn from. What are we seeing? From one great conjunct to the other, we are becoming a people that really understands how astrology and how the stars affect us. I hope you guys really enjoyed this conversation because the Grand Conjunct is a big deal. By the way, the next conjunct after the 7 AD was in, or 7 BC was in 14 AD. I think that's a little too late. And by the way, I think it happened in Virgo, which was something, and again, it's not always necessarily, I wasn't Virgo, it was in Taurus, actually, I think. But it didn't have the hallmarks of an Annunciation. It didn't have the hallmarks of, hey, we're going to create a world religion that, 40% of the world is going to follow. Didn't have those hallmarks. It had fights, it had arguments, it had challenges, it had empires. It didn't have the calling card of a Messiah. So from 7 BC to now, the 7 BC represented that Sun Messiah. The 2020 Grand Conjunct was a calling card of a new age. Are we paying attention to it? Just like 7 AD was the calling card of the age of Pisces, 7 BC, gosh, I keep saying that. The 2020 is the calling card of the age of Aquarius. I want to thank you guys for being part of my journey, and I am blessed beyond words to know all of you. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Thank you for following along at home. And, at the end of the day, when I put together this thank you, it was really to show them, that I really care. These are the sponsors. These are the ones that allow me to be able to do this work every day. You can like and subscribe. You can schedule me in the new year. I want you to be safe. I want you to be healthy. I want you to be happy. Give each other the heart taps, and this heart tap goes out to all of you for being part of this channel in whatever way it is that you do, whether you just stop by once a week or every day. Do the heart tap and remind you to simply keep going. See you guys. Merry Christmas. Nope.